When you start to think less about efficiency of AI and more of what value AI is creating, you start to ask other type of questions. And for us, those questions are, what is the cultural relevance, not only of the jaguar, for example, but the use of these technologies for the local community? How do we partner with the local community to create a project that, yes, it's AI driven, but it has more as a systemic perspective of new forms of understanding conservation models.
Hello, ReFi Podcast. Today we welcome Constanza Gomez Mont, a social entrepreneur known for her work at the intersection of technology, governance, and social innovation. She's the founder and CEO of C-Minds, a Latin American action tank advancing ethical AI, digital inclusion, and sustainability. She co-founded AI for Climate, using emerging tech to combat climate change. With over 20 years of experience, she's advised governments and organizations like the World Bank, Google, and UNESCO. Constanza is also known for shaping Mexico's national AI strategy and her work in bioculture regeneration, pioneering digital tokens and eco-credit models for environmental impact. Personally, I really enjoyed Constanza's emphasis on culture when developing technology and how we need to be thinking about systems, not separate realities.
Absolutely. And my favorite part about the episode is Constanza's genuine passion for what she does and her commitment to embedding ethics and justice into tech. And I love that she reminded us to always start with the why. Why are we building these tools? She also called on us to embrace a slower approach, appreciate ancient knowledge and indigenous wisdom to innovation, rather than reducing it to the game of efficiencies. It's a very humbling and hopeful episode for sure. So let's dive in. Hi, Constanza. It's so great to have you on the show.
Thank you. Super glad to be here, Maya and Teresa, talking about such important topics. So thank you for the invitation.
Welcome, Constanza. We're really excited to have you here and talk about your work with technology to address some of the most pressing environmental challenges. So maybe can we start by you sharing a little bit about your background to journey and maybe talk to us about how do you see technology and maybe particularly AI drive the future of regeneration?
Of course. So I founded and lead an action tank that is actually like a think tank, but we actually do stuff. Not only reports, but also like to put our hands, and walk the talk regarding implementation of new forms of policy development. I founded it more than about 20 years ago. So it's been a while. It's been a great evolution. And exactly the question that has been central to our work is, what is the role of emerging technologies, especially in the recent, 7-8 years, the role of AI, the data-intense models and AI towards sustainability development goals, and specifically environment and climate change. So as an action tank, we see both policy development and then actually incubate projects to be able to test these new forms of policy. And our focus for the last 5 years through our Future of Earth lab has been understanding the role of AI and other technologies for biodiversity conservation, mainly for Latin America. Your question on, the role of technology. So in our perspective and our experience, technology plays a key role and actually one of the key enablers of this new paradigm, towards a new regenerative economy is, in our belief, powered by, these new forms of emerging technology, especially with AI. Of course, there's tons of considerations to take into account. We'll dive deep into those a bit further down the line. But in a general sense, what we're seeing with AI is that it is not only creating new realities, but it's helping scale and create more effective solutions and be able to create more transparent, actually, paradigms where we're lowering the risk of investment, especially for nature-based solutions, for example, and the climate agenda in general. So the role of AI is not only necessarily about creating efficiencies, but rather how do we create more value regarding this joint goals for the environment. And the role of AI is definitely a key point in understanding that new realities have to be invented and designed if we want to be truthful to the crisis we're living both in climate and biodiversity, and understanding that to be able to present solutions that are scaled, we need to explore all type of tools that we have. And AI comes at handy to understand both the opportunities and, of course, be very mindful about the ethical considerations and challenges.
Wow. And we definitely want to dive into some of the technical capabilities that AI brings to the climate action sector. But before we go in there, I'm just curious to learn more about your personal story, because and you mentioned, that you founded that action tank over 20 years ago. And, AI wasn't that much on the map 20 years ago. And how did you get to this stage? What motivated you to dedicate your career to exploring the role of, and can you share maybe what inspired you to become a founder in this space?
Of course. So being a digital native, woman, it was normal for us, back then to think about, okay, what is the role of technologies? Of course, not AI. We didn't even know that this new paradigm was going to exist. But yes, the role of, back then mobile phones, right? What were these new technologies used to democratize access to many things, and basic services? So in general, the question around how do we use digital technologies to create more access, to democratize knowledge, to democratize decision-making, to be able to fill in the gaps of, in education, in environment, in health sectors. So my organization was born with the commitment of creating a platform where young people, I was quite young at that age, at that time I was 18 years old. So I thought how can more people, especially more women such as I, can use a platform to be able to transform rhetoric and ideas into action in topics that really matter to us for our communities, in Latin America, as in many other regions of the world. It's kind of a bipolar feeling, you see such wealth sometimes and such the world of so many possibilities that technology was enabling. But at the same time, you cross the street, and you see a different reality, and you see that this paradigm just doesn't make sense, And the question of how you create more inclusive bridges between realities became central to our work. So C-Minds was born as this platform where more young people, such as myself, could really act upon these passions, these questions, these societal goals of creating, better living conditions, not for a group, but, generalizing these access to these better lives. So it evolved, of course, and I started to feel less young, of course. So I stopped saying that it was a platform for young people, and it evolved with the rhythm of technology. So being quite agile and being dynamic, actually, we were one of the first social innovation organizations in Latin America. And one of the core parts of a social organization is to understand the rhythm and the evolution of both topics, priorities, and technologies. So for us, we literally rode the wave of what new technology advancements were happening. Actually, I was part of on a personal story, I was part of the Singularity University Global Solutions Program, where we learned about, the potential uses for different technologies, not only what was coming with data-enabled models and big data use, but also gene editing and, drones and, BMI, the brain interface technologies. And through there, it was an 8-month program that strengthened my understanding that, these tools are meant to transform realities. And the core question became, well, what realities we should be working towards to? And for myself, I lived actually at that time for 6 years in San Francisco, where I felt that living in the front row of technological innovation would enable me, I would be even more empowered to bridge the gap, towards Latin America. And in a sense, I was very proud that C-Minds it doubled our commitment with ethical AI, because we were also seeing a realm enabled by technology that didn't make sense, Access gaps were getting bigger. We were creating basically more and more gadgets, and we were not necessarily asking, for me personally, the right questions. How do we use these topics for social development, and not necessarily because I have a shoe that now can measure the X amount of, So for me, a gap was missing there. But however, those 6 years of bridging the gap between, frontier tech innovation and Latin America realities created a very strong theory of change for C-Minds, to understand how new technologies could help as a tool, not necessarily the Silicon Valley way, kind of simplistic of let's inject AI into everything and, let's solve the world with technology. On the contrary, how can we strengthen a perspective that is born from Latin America towards Latin America that is multi-layered, where technology cannot be separated from culture and cannot be separated from the social dimension, and it cannot be separated from the economic and environmental dimension. And how then when we talk about technological driven projects, we're not talking about simplistic tech solution, but rather thinking about a tool that creates new dynamics in a system and creates not only new dynamics in a system, but rather helps us bridge gaps through data decision-making, transparency, scale, effectiveness, and others. I'll stop there. I think I could go on and on with this question, but it has been a learning evolution on how these tools can help serve best the social and environmental agenda.
I love that you grounded us in a place, right? And you mentioned the story, that you spent some time in San Francisco and how the tech scene is very different there than in some other places, and how oftentimes it's very reductionist in many ways. And I loved what you mentioned, how that adopting a Latin America centered approach is a better framework that you found through your work, and what you mentioned about tech and its connection to culture. So can you share more? What do you think is the role of Latin America in pioneering some of the tech solutions for the environment?
Of course. So when we talk about Latin America, I don't know if you know, but we're home to 40% of the world's biodiversity. So when we talk about what happens in Latin America, it doesn't stay in Latin America. On the contrary, whatever happens there has a complete global effect, both on climate, environmental cycles, the world's hotspot of biodiversity. So basically this question of, well, what is the role of these technologies specifically, for Latin America's and climate and biodiversity agenda becomes key. So for us, the story started some years ago, around 4 years ago. Around this exploration. Actually, we together with IUCN, which is an amazing, enormous environmental organization, we piloted with them, the first living lab of AI in Latin America to use AI to understand how best to manage conservation areas. So we started with a project that marked a significant point in our trajectory. That was the conservation and the protection of the jaguars. So the jaguars, I don't know if you know, but this species, apart from just being mind-blowing in its beauty, its biodiversity importance and its cultural importance is key. So the jaguars are considered an umbrella species. So what does that mean? If the jaguar is healthy, its population is healthy, it means that the entire ecosystem where the jaguar is present is healthy, meaning that it becomes a proxy of ecosystemic health. So managing a project that goes around the jaguar not only understands, and using AI, and I'll explain a bit more how we used it there, not only is going deep into the medular questions of, environment conservation, but also enables us to explore our theory of change, that these multiple dimensions have to be present in these tech-driven solutions, specifically the cultural one. So because we tend to kind of forget, that we kind of see everything kind of isolated and, when, as you say, Maya, we kind of reduce solutions, okay, we create a model and what's the efficiency of that model? But on the contrary, when you start to think less about efficiency of AI and more of what value AI is creating, you start to ask other type of questions. And for us, those questions are, what is a cultural relevance, not only of the jaguar, for example, but the use of these technologies for the local community? How do we partner with the local community to create a project that, yes, it's AI driven, but it has more as a systemic perspective of new forms of understanding conservation models? We start to ask different questions that allow us for a deeper and more integral approach to AI for conservations. So story short, for this specific example that we led some years ago as the first living lab on AI and conservation for Latin America, we used deep learning models, students developed, because again, the ripple effect, right? When you center the questions on value and not efficiency, then you start to ask, well, how can the local community be part of this? In our case, the students in the local university were the ones that developed two very pioneering deep learning models. The first one was to understand and automate the detection of thousands of images we had with camera traps all around. the mangrove impressive and super dense ecosystem area. And it started to identify, the presence of jaguars. And this was very important, not only because, and we got so excited. We saw a jaguar, on the camera and everyone gets excited. And it's not only, this, measurement that is valuable, you start to create policies around this. So for us specifically, the understanding of not only if there were jaguars in the area that we did with one AI system, but we did a second one that could understand what jaguar it was. So it started to learn about the different patterns of the skin, the rosettes. And now our AI model could tell us if it was, X jaguar that passed 5 times differently, or if it was a family of jaguars. And that gave 3 specific results. The first is that for the first time, there was concrete data and evidence that led into the policy creation of the state for the natural reserves and the policy for the 30 by 30 conservation strategy that's basically conserving 30% of land and sea, for some years. So this project was the one that gave the data for that. The second, it allowed to understand what was the biocorridor development and the focus, because we now had evidence to understand where the jaguars were going in, and that allowed to create a biocorridor approach and strategy. And the third, it allowed us to register this area into the International Green List of IUCN of protected areas. So also prioritizing this as not only as a very local importance, but as a global protected area that then has more, funding opportunities and spotlights, etc. And the third thing we did with AI systems in this project, and I'll talk more about other projects, of course, and the regional perspective, is that through our partners, we used these other learning automated systems and deep learning to understand sound pattern recognitions. And in very short amount of time, we were able to recognize through sound more than 117 species in the area, which many of them are endangered species that not even experts knew that were present in that area. So when you start to have data where you're demonstrating the presence of endangered species, where you're demonstrating the changes of patterns of these species in an area, and you're demonstrating the health of the ecosystems through AI, because all of this is automated. No human would be able to do this, with a, pencil and pen. Of course, this would be impossible. Then you start to ask the correct financial questions, the correct policy questions, and the correct entrepreneurial questions, because of course, all of this is open to anyone that wants to use it for their own realms. And I'm sure you have more questions. So I'll just say in a very fast form that this has been a great inspiration, not only for us, but for others in the region, where now we're launching actually in COP that's coming up in the next 2 weeks, an alliance for a biocorridor for the jaguars, where tech transfer is the main point of this. So now we're transferring our AI models to others that are working with the jaguars, and now creating an approach that is regional, that is, yes, powered by AI, but also is very intentional about the partnerships with local communities, about the different dimensions that are present in these type of new paradigms, and of course, in the role that inclusion, fairness, and equity have in AI-powered projects such as this one.
Amazing. Love hearing about, the spotlight on Latin America and initiatives like these that are huge for biodiversity protection. One question that I have, Constanza, is because I feel like, these technologies, whether it's AI or blockchain, for example, can really unlock so many, different use cases through like climate data, value chain traceability, land stewardship, climate insurance, community governance, and all that. But I feel like, that to some extent, these initiatives haven't really taken off yet, that like completely, I guess. So what are the maybe biggest obstacles in Latin America when it comes to trying to implement tech-based solutions for climate action?
So yes. So one of the core things, for Latin America as in any other region of the world, I would say 2 things. And I think the list is much longer. And this question requires, an entire podcast to answer it, right? Because of its importance. So one, when we talk about tech adoption, it's, the focus of needing this to be bidirectional is sometimes lacking, not only in Latin America, in other regions of the world. So one of the challenges that we've seen is when we talk about tech adoption, not necessarily the focus sometimes is access to technology. I think that is getting better and better by the day, with free tools, courses you can take in YouTube. So I think the deeper question is not necessarily tech access, but is what type of access are we enabling? And understanding that these type of projects have to be far away from a group coming into a different, community reality paradigm and kind of just sprinkling their predefined projects into this. So a challenge there is bidirectionality. So for us, what it has meant is to create very long design periods of the projects where we can understand local realities, where we can understand traditional knowledge. That is another form of technology. Yes, it's not digital, but it is as important to include in these type of projects. And then when you have the time, and that is a challenge, because everything is so fast paced, from the financiers that want, results like really fast to, our Western lifestyle of pace. A challenge is in the design process to include enough time at the beginning so that tech adoption is done together with the community, is designed with territory leaders, includes traditional ecological knowledge and not only a Western philosophy of how tech must be used and what type of tech is the most valuable one, and also includes other forms of questions such as, is this AI system or any type of system, is it needed, for this environment and for the questions that are present in the community, not our need as a tech sector to be able to prove value. It's very different where you're talking with territory and with local leaders. So access, type of access, of course, connectivity. But, that's going down and down, We were just, 2 months ago having a workshop with 41 amazing Indigenous youth representatives from 11 different nationalities in the Ecuadorian Amazon. And it was a course where we were adding skill sets on the use of AI, the use of media, the use of drones, and they were adding their own local knowledge, and we were merging these two to create solutions to conservation challenges in the Amazonian. And suddenly it was a course for 41 people. And of course, we were left without data for internet. So nobody could download, the course material. And we were literally in the middle of nowhere. We drove for a bit, but then you arrived to a store where we could buy Starlink for $350. You could buy Starlink and then connect yourself, to internet access. So I know that for many realities, internet access is a challenge. But I can say that at least in the projects I've been present in and for our projects, that challenge is being now minimal. And almost all of our local partners now have, for example, access to Starlink, where they're, of course, defining the rules of access, because that's another question, because that type of internet governance decision-making has to come from them. But access to connectivity is going less by less. And the third one I would put in the central of the equation of why I believe it's not scaling is because two things there. One is that we still need to reduce the risk of investment in these type of solutions. And AI is playing a role in that. So sometimes finance goes to places and, sectors where risk is minimal. So because there's already proven solutions, because there's a demand in the market, because, the return on investments can be, in a short term and successful. When you're talking about conservation, you're talking about projects that are long-term. You're talking about projects that it's not an easy question. What's a return on investment? Like the return on investment, it's our well-being and that we survive as a species. It's that sometimes that cannot be measured in economic terms. But again, we're so used to saying, okay, my investment is this, but what's the return on investment? And we understand that's the incentive mechanism. But for conservation and climate projects, sometimes that equation doesn't work. So the lack of finance towards these projects needs more trustability, needs more credibility, and needs more business and policy cases. And that's a challenge. However, AI is helping in these challenges very specifically. It's creating more transparency. It's creating, you mentioned blockchain. Blockchain is creating more traceability and thus more accountability. And other technologies are creating more monitoring, reporting, and verification schemes that are providing this evidence, that is providing this trustability, and is providing this credibility that nature-based solutions, as other climate change solutions, can be a worthwhile investment-prone solution projects, ventures. And thus finance is going slowly in. And the last one is what type of access to finance. So being from Latin America, I'm obliged to say that, from all the funding that it's going here to conservation, we're not even talking about AI and new technologies. I'm saying general conservation funding. Only 1% of that funding is going to Indigenous peoples and Afro-descendant communities and local communities that are at the front line of nature conservation. So a challenge there, not only for the tech ecosystem that is working towards conservation, but generally speaking, is that we have to create more inclusive financial access. And I believe AI and blockchain will play a very specific role in decentralizing this financial access.
I love that you mentioned the indigenous communities. And I'm wondering, when you engage with them, in order to co-create these solutions, what are some of the biggest asks that they have? Or maybe are there any surprising lessons that you've seen interacting with them and, kind of sharing their voice?
It has been extremely humbling for me personally and for us as an organization at Sea Minds and Natura Teclac that actually we launched this year as a commitment to strengthen the tech adoption for this agenda. It has been very humbling to learn so much about other type of, from cosmovisions to very profound wisdom on how to take care of nature, how to plant in a way that is regenerative. And basically, I will sum it up knowing that sometimes, we come and I come from this Western perspective where things are linear. The economy is extractive. Every project has to be fastly, implemented because we have, these constraints that we kind of auto-impose ourselves as, a Western society, and that everything is driven by short-term profitability. And then you come into another reality, another way of thinking, another way of living that I have learned that is complete in tune with nature's wellness, that is completely aligned with a systems perspective, understanding that we cannot separate the community well-being with nature conservation, for example. We cannot separate, these multiple dimensions in these solutions, in these projects, where I understand that, for example, dream interpretation for some communities is a technology and is recognized as a technology. And then for me, understanding that my own preconceptions of what technology even was, with their form and their vision of what technology is, has been not only enriching for me as a personal and my personal evolution in this mission, but as an institution, being very intentional in creating a theory of change that puts at the center of our equation what we have learned from Indigenous peoples and local communities and Afro-descendant communities, that basically is a restorative way of economy and a restorative paradigm behind the design of processes, that the balance between people, in the Western world, sometimes we think of ourselves as people and our economies as something different from nature, when our economies are completely embedded in nature and people are nature, So thinking about systems and not isolated parts of realities has been very important for us. That has come directly from these type of understandings and cosmovisions and profound wisdom. And lastly, for me and for our organization, and I would say generally for Latin American organizations that are working directly with local leaderships and partners, understanding the richness of their culture that is integrated into projects, and then having projects respect that culture, and not only respect it, but enable new forms driven by technology to expand it and to protect it in its richness, becomes a different way of project design, where not necessarily Post-its and, storyboards make sense. Rather, deeper questions on personal transformation, on the role of different type of technologies in the new paradigm of a regenerative ecosystem. And lastly, the commitment that these tools have to serve for a higher value and not for efficiency. When you inject that into decision making, into project design, and into a new culture change that we have to transition into, that is basically a regenerative economy, then your metrics change, your vision changes, your vocabulary enriches, and new forms of bidirectional systems, learning systems, become the norm.
That was such a beautiful explanation of what this paradigm shift even means when we talk about switching to this regenerative paradigm. And you really speak, our language here, and the previous guests on the podcast, how, the argument that we're not separate from nature, we're a fundamental part of it. And I'm curious to learn more how to implement this new way of seeing into some of these projects on the ground. And you mentioned ethical AI. I would take it a step further to regenerative AI and the example with jaguars. But can you walk us through another success story where changing this perspective achieved measurable impact on the ground?
Of course. So, for example, we partnered up, and I'm sure it's part of the ReFi ecosystem, with the Regen Network, They're doing an amazing job of allowing for new forms of finance, through biodiversity credits. And they're based on blockchain. They integrate blockchain for traceability and new forms of governance systems. They're using AI, for DMRV, etc. And basically what we partnered up with them together with Fundación Pachamama, which is an extraordinary organization that is based in Ecuador that has been working for the last 30 years with these questions together with local territories and indigenous populations. And our other partner, Cuencas Sagradas, who is a group of more than 30, is an alliance of more than 30 indigenous nationalities, nations, and communities, bringing together this question on how do you tap into this new nature-based economy where there is incentives to protect nature and not to extract its natural resources. So there's these new forms of understanding, for example, the biodiversity credits. And actually, as a parenthesis, the use of the name credits doesn't make sense at the territory level because they think about, having a credit with a bank or, being in a debt system. So I really want to change the narrative of biodiversity units, right? But either way, it's a new form of tapping into new markets, new green markets. So this case study was we were not part of the pilot. Actually, we just joined to help scale this pilot to other communities in other regions. But the first pilot, it was very successful in the way that it allowed to use technology in a way that proved with quite a lot of transparency and traceability using blockchain, the value of conservation action. And then these biodiversity units were sold on an international market for the market to buy these type of credits or units, and for the community to have the funding to be able to not only have conservation action, but to be able to pay for other forms of health, their health system, their education system, and other topics that are as important to them. So I can I could of course share a link to that where we're helping also document, the lessons learned and, the model around this. And not only us, I would also like to talk about, other projects that are existing that are proving value on the ethical front. Not only, for example, there's a project that's called in Colombia, it's called Guacamaya. They're using AI to understand the different deforestation risks in land. So basically what they're doing is an alert system to understand if there's risk for deforestation and if yes, act upon it. It's led by the Humboldt Institute, other organizations, they're using Microsoft technology, Universidad de los Andes. It's a consortium of organizations, which I really like this multi-sector approach, and we firmly believe in that power. And they're doing that with forests, for forest deforestation. We're seeing not only institutions that are like, global partnerships. We're seeing this at a very local scale. For example, there's a beautiful project that applied to a prize with us that there's a women association of local farmers that are using AI systems to understand if there are certain risks in their territory. And if they see that there's a risk of deforestation, or they see these changes in, with AI systems and, satellite data and such, it brings up alerts, and their governance structures allows them to act upon these reports. So they're doing that as well in Colombia, in Peru, the Fab Lab, and they're doing an amazing work in understanding AI and blockchain technology to be able to think and rethink about what is Industry 4.0 that is not extractive, but is, again, restorative. And they're partnering up with the local indigenous population, especially women, to create new beauty products that are based with native plants that are in extinction in the Amazon forest, to create new products for beauty, where you're using blockchain to trace back the origin of these plants. And this is all tied to a regeneration action where they're regenerating degraded land where these plants are being extinct. It's all tied back. And then the consumer knows through blockchain about this traceability and about the origin of these, not only product, the ingredients at that scale of a product. I could go on and on, from Argentina, they're using, digital tokens to understand the value of ecosystemic services, nativas it's called, to understand how do we measure, the ecosystemic value of ecosystems and nature, and then how do we use that to provide for financial incentives for local farmers to transform their practices into restorative and regeneration agricultural practices. So they're using a lot of AI to understand, the changes in the landscape and blockchain and digital tokens for this type of new paradigms. I'll stop there because the list is on and on. I'll stop with the emphasis and being very vocal about the richness of Latin America in examples of how technology is being used, not necessarily to create new industry models, but to create a new paradigm on social development, on, biodiversity, richness, conservation, regeneration. And what I personally love about this conversation in Latin America, and we're very committed in CMICE to push forward, is that there is a certain responsibility of Latin America as a hotspot for biodiversity. And because of our context and so great opportunities in eliminating these gaps of access, we have a responsibility to define the ethos of the use of these technologies. And I believe, and this is particularly our conversation, I believe that the global South will step up to the challenge, I hope. At least in our end, we're working on towards that. That helps redefine the whys of these technologies and the purpose behind these new technologies, where then the questions become much more deeper in breadth and scope, much more inclusive of different realities that are local, and much more festive in a way of understanding the potential for transformation that the new technologies are allowing, but very conscious about the ethical considerations on data, on security, on governance, on shared benefits, on, property, on not having an extractive mindset towards data, but rather how do we create a paradigm that is completely centered in equity and in justice. And I believe that's not only the beauty and the role of Latin America and other regions of the world, but also for us as an organization, the commitment to be able to co-define with other partners a new vision for these technologies, especially when we're talking for biodiversity conservation.
I'm wondering, can you maybe now paint the whole image of the different stakeholders? Because we've talked about the organizations, we've talked about, the maybe executors on the ground. Let's talk a little bit about maybe like larger institutions, governments. What do you see as the role of AI policies in pushing these innovations forward? Because we also know that you worked on drafting Mexico's national AI strategy. So what were maybe some lessons from that as well?
Oh, so many. I would say in a very summarized way that governments play an enormous role on defining how are we going to develop these technologies and putting safeguards on certain conversations that we need to prioritize, especially on the use of data, especially on the use of, local indigenous knowledge, how to create shared benefits around that. So two things. The first is that the government has the potential of creating incentives for the industry and other stakeholders to accelerate innovation. So not only being a potential to finance, for example, R&D, which is a key actor because we need to fund things that are more exploratory, and this type of funding that normally has to come by governance or by philanthropy, where they take risks in the development of these new technologies and these new forms of projects. And the government has a role to be able to take these risks, to be able to push the frontiers of what is possible, where sometimes the market doesn't make sense. Of course, well, what is the return of investment of protecting, the Amazon? Well, there are certain conversations that, are not there yet. And the government could be an actor that helps fund this needed conversations, needed projects, but are too riskful for venture capital, for example. The second is regulation and policies. So actually, I had the amazing opportunity to be part of a group of 24 international experts that drafted UNESCO's global standard setting regulation document that was signed by 192 countries, 192. I'll fact check that afterwards. I think it's 193 today. A global instrument to understand how ethical AI should be developed. And I'm very proud to say that this is the first global instrument that includes a chapter on AI and the environment. And this is very particular because normally when we were talking about ethical AI, we were very prone on the social aspect of it, the data, health systems, inclusion, equity, and such, but not necessarily prioritizing the role of AI for the environment. And what I say with that is that we have to be very conscious that AI has a great energy consumption, but also critical minerals, water. It's not only the carbon conversation of decarbonizing AI, which is super important, but we have to go a bit broader on the role and the impact of AI on the environment that goes beyond carbon. And these type of regulatory frameworks put that at the center of the equation. And then the governments, can operationalize these international standards into their local context. And the role of the government for this is to create a strategy, a plan, and or regulations that allow, the AI ecosystem and the tech ecosystem in general be transition into decarbonization, but also into net nature positive schemes. And second, take care of the ethical approaches to data, to intellectual property, to shared benefit mechanisms, etc. And if we don't have a government that understands these complex issues, because they're not easy in any sense, but also doesn't take a proactive stance in helping define both the potential uses, that is more of an industry, but more of the vision of how AI can be used in these local contexts, and then help finance it and help create these foundations for more people and more organizations and more companies to be able to use these AI systems into their own business models and ventures, I think we would be missing out on the potential of AI to be a true transformative tool for biodiversity and conservation.
That's a really relevant message for the governments out there and the importance of policy provisions to ensure we don't, repeat the same mistakes with other forms of tech that have, been made before. And as we're coming to a close, I'm curious, what's your message for the Web3 and specifically the ReFi community as well? You speak so passionately about the role of tech and the potential of blockchain and Web3 for traceability and tapping into new markets, but there are also inherent risks, right, in following kind of just a blind tech approach. What would you like to see more of in the ReFi space?
I would like to see more purpose that is rooted in also traditional knowledge. I would like to see more purpose on a clear vision of having tools that are enabling a new paradigm, a new economy that is based on regeneration. And I would love to see a community that is more humble, including ourselves as well, in understanding that some things are just not working and that some conversations need to be very mindful and not fast paced, because we're so sometimes committed to being the first ones to implement X or Y that sometimes we're forgetting why, and defining a co-vision on the whys and this new paradigm that we could be working towards too is the question that sometimes I believe is lacking in the tech groups, including ourselves as well. We're very humble about this. And I would end by saying that there's a very profound potential of using these technologies to create this new economic paradigm. And we just have to be very mindful that at the center of this new paradigm that we're all helping enable through these new tools, the question of equity that is not only towards people, but as well towards nature is the core of our decision making and the very bold vision that is needed for this new vision.
Amazing. This is me leaving quite optimistic. And I know we had discussed this on the podcast before as well, but sometimes I feel like we see tech as something inherently extractive, and seeing that if we do it right, it can become this incredible tool for regeneration gives me a lot of hope. So yeah, can't wait to follow your work in the future, Constanza. To wrap up our conversation, we always tend to ask these 3 rapid fire questions, and I would like to move to that part now. So I'll just shoot the first question if that's okay. What book are you currently reading?
I'm reading literally children's books. I have a 1-year-old child, and the book I am reading right now is How to Be a Conscious Parent. And this is also being useful for my work because it is reminding me on a daily basis that being conscious of, what type of parenting, not only with my son, but with the world, and nature as stewards of nature, is giving me both the energy and deeper questions on what new forms of leadership are needed for this new realities.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't think about it that way, but I love that connection between children's books and nurturing our ecosystems. It's a really great insight. The second question is, what excites you the most about your work?
I love the world of possibilities. What excites me more is that C-Minds is a platform that has become very effective in transforming ideas into collaborative action.
Perfect. And the third question is, do you have like a mantra or a personal motto that you feel it has really shaped your life?
Yes. So I learned this some years ago from the founder and director of the International Leadership Program from Yale University, which is also the founder of a fellowship I'm in right now, of Climate Fellowship. And she said, Constanza, just remind yourself to let yourself evolve. And I think that when we let ourselves evolve, we become more intentional in lessons, we become more humble in opportunities, and we become more conscious about ethical frameworks for decision making.
What a great note to conclude this episode. Let's, encourage our listeners and ourselves to be more humble and conscious of our decisions and being intentional behind our work. I really love the passion that you have for the work that you're doing. And I encourage all of our listeners to follow your work, check out C-Mind, check out AI for Climate. We'll make sure to link information about you in the episode notes. So let's definitely stay in touch. And thank you so much for your time and sharing your wisdom.
It was great being here with you, Maya and Teresa. Hopefully it'll be the start of many other conversations to come.
Thank you, Constanza. It was a pleasure.